The theme for this year for the NHRA is legends, and so for tonight we have legends of fuel altereds. Now, as you look up here on the stage and you see the four that will represent the fuel altereds, you might think it looks a bit like Heaven's Waiting Room, but it's really not. I'm sorry if I offended anybody with that, but it's facts are facts. So, no, we have, and say that, I want to point out that Leon Fitzgerald, who's sitting right here, and you'll hear from Leon later as the evening goes on, next month will be 85. So, how about that? I'm sure we're in for a great evening. I encourage everyone to participate. This is not anything that is one-sided. We're all in here together to relive some great times and talk about some great times coming. And with that thought about great times coming, I want to point out that the fuel alters bear the dubious honor of being the only class actually stricken by the NHRA. However, in April of this year, we will do a 4-wide fuel-altered race at Las Vegas. So that's something that we're looking forward to. The 4 cars involved will be the Winged Express, the Nanook, Randy Bradford's Fiat, and our car, the Rat Trap. So all that said, I'm going to turn it over to Jack Beckman, who very ably has offered to MC this and will do great. And we should also know that Jack is low ET and high mile an hour for the day. How about that?
Fantastic. So a lot of fans come up to me and they say, a couple today, "Hey, you got to be crazy driving one of those things." I said, "You guys want to see crazy?" At 6 o'clock at the museum, 4 of them are going to be sitting up on the stage. Actually, how about we bring the panelists up right now? Rich might take an hour to get up on stage, okay? And listen, I'm not going to do elaborate introductions because we're going to spend a lot of time. I haven't seen Randy yet. Where are you, Randy? Randy Bradford, come on up, buddy. And grab Dave Hough by the hand and bring him up while you're at it. And we got Rich Guasco, and we got Leon Fitzgerald. If you gentlemen will all come up there and take your seats. What I want to do after we talk a little bit about the history, I'm going to talk to each of the panelists, get some stories from them. And what I'd really like you for, Rich, can you hear me over there? Yeah. I would love you guys to think about some notable stories, some good memories from your fuel-altered experiences and time on the road. I think the fans love to hear those stories. If I think of a fuel-altered, I think of a car with a crankshaft centerline 24 inches off the ground, with a 92-inch wheelbase. The ones out there, they got smarter and started lowering the crankshafts as the tracks got better and better. So that's almost second generation fuel altered. There's a couple of them that stay here and reside in the museum. I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that the first fuel altered predates the first, what we would call a top fuel dragster. I think fuel alters technically kind of have their roots in 1949. Now in 1957, NHRA decided, let me rephrase, that's not a fair statement. C.J. Pappy Hart decided these cars are going too fast to run nitro. NHRA followed suit and instituted the fuel ban from 1957 to 1963 and a half. But there were already nitro sedans and coupes running before that time, although fuel altered was still far from getting its own sanctioned independent class at that point. NHRA finally decided in 1967, we're going to write rules, we're going to make a category called fuel altered, and we're going to let people build to those specs. Back before the fuel ban, in 1955, the NHRA rulebook actually offered classes for coupes and sedans. They had A, B, and C, depending on cubic inches and weight, fuel classes, and then they had 2 roadster classes called hot roadster. So there was cars that were slowly morphing into what would become fuel alters. When the nitro ban went into effect, it actually had the unforeseen consequence of causing an enormous growth in the top fuel cars. From 1960 to 1964, the number of top fuel cars that appeared on the scene was just astronomical. And finally, NHRA said, you know, we've got to let them run with us. But they still didn't let these guys run. In 1967, they finally said, you guys have a category, but we're not going to run your own eliminator. Could you imagine running a fuel-altered in competition eliminator and letting somebody take up to a 4-second head start in front of you? Like, I'd hate to be that poor bastard running an 11-second car looking in my rearview mirror hoping you stayed in your own lane, right? I mean, I'd put the fear of God, maybe they just forfeited the race at some point. So I think drag news in December of '59 was actually the first reference where they called cars fuel altered. So if we say that that's the beginning of fuel altereds, in 1960 more cars started being built. By '63, it was getting to be a pretty popular class. And I think the thing that was pretty cool about fuel altereds is back then, the sky was the limit. There was no set powertrain, there was no set body combination. You could have, there was 23 Ts, 27 Ts, a 29 Model A, 32 and 34 Ford Coupes, Austins, Bantams, a Fiat Topolino. It was basically anything went for the body. And the same thing applied to the power plant. You had Chevrolet small blocks, Chevrolet big blocks, 331, 354, 392, and late model Hemis. And even Oldsmobile engines were competitive back then. So I think the thing that made fuel altered absolutely exciting to the fans is you could literally see any type of engine hanging out in the breeze with any type of body combination around the thing. The other thing that was interesting and fairly unique about fuel altereds is, what do we got? Southern California, Southern California, Southern California, Northern California. With the exception of a handful of cars in the Midwest, and most of those centered around Chicago, fuel altered racing was a California event. Is everybody here a Californian? You guys have no idea how spoiled, well, you do when you pay property taxes, how spoiled we are. That because of the fine year-round weather, and back then the number of tracks available, that tons of people came out of the woodwork and built tons of different cars, and these were the type of cars that grabbed the headlines so much that NHRA finally relinquished and said, you get your own eliminator category. In 1963, the March Meet had a complete fuel-altered eliminator. They had enough cars to make their own independent category out there, and it was getting to be highly, highly successful by that point. Around that time, AA gas supercharged, you know, the blown wheelies and those style of cars, and then the AFX cars, which would eventually morph into Pro Stock and or Funny Car, were starting to become on the scene. So the big irony of fuel altered racing is about the time it started getting really popular and got its own eliminator category, the writing was kind of on the wall. There was these funny cars that were coming up. A lot of the dragster drivers abandoned class and went over there. And with the other door slammers, it was really tough to get your own unique eliminator. So you got a bunch of guys that I think you guys were outlaws from the get-go. Dave joked about once NHRA pulled the plug. What was that saying? Had to smuggle you in under the cover of night?
Yeah, that was Steve Evans.
Yeah, they said about fuel altereds there. But I think from day one, there was a struggle for an identity in a class. And the fact that you guys did what you did for so long, and some 45 years later, your names are still so synonymous with drag racing, I think is an absolute testament to your passion, your motivation, your complete lack of common sense. And to have you guys up here, I just think it's drag racing coming full circle. We still have fuel altereds that run today, and it's all because of these guys. So I want to get started with our panelists. Dave, I'm going to start with you. Your first run down a drag strip.
Yokern Dragway. It was California versus Texas challenge, and we won super stock in a 59 El Camino.
So your first run was in a pickup truck.
Yes. And that was 1960.
Okay, how on earth do you go from a 59 El Camino into a blown, injected, fuel-burning altered?
Well, we built an injected altered, and we found out that if we just put a little nitro in it, we could qualify at about half of the fuel altered shows at that time. So we started, it was sponsored by Holiday Olds and had an Oldsmobile in it. We couldn't keep it together, but we could make the 16 car show. And then we decided we'd like to do better than get beat first round. And so we put a 354, iron 354, out of, my partner at that time was working for Donovan, and we got all the spare parts out of the Kreitz and Donovan car and threw it in that 29 steel Model A and ran, and it had Scotty's muffler built the chassis. It was mild steel, and we went 198 miles an hour.
It sounds really safe to me. It wasn't leftover muffler tubing you built it out of, was it?
I don't know.
So at that point, where you decided to go to a Hemi, where you decided to put nitro in it, did that just sink the hook and you said, this is it for me?
Well, that and the mole. He saw the ugly
Donovan.
car we were running in, and he was embarrassed because we had his name on the car. It was Hough, Brent, and Donovan. And he's going, oh, God, you don't go to the races with that thing. And so he took us over to California Chassis Engineering and semi-sponsored Don Tuttle building our first, what we call purpose-built fuel altered, and it had the crank down about 4 inches below what everybody else was running, and that's what really sucked us in.
So once you got competitive, and it was with that car that I think you guys really became a competitive car.
Yes.
A lot of match racing. There wasn't, back then there was 9 national events on, well, no, there was 4 when you first started running. In 1970 they went to 7. There just wasn't a lot of opportunity to go run national events. So when you own a fuel altered, where do you take your race car?
Well, at that time, when Lions was running, we started getting fuel altered shows, and we would run Carlsbad on Friday night, the beach, or Irwindale on Saturday night, and Fontana on Sunday, 3 nights a week, and you know, it just sucked us in. But there were fuel altered shows during that period. From mid-60s to mid-70s, I mean, almost every weekend you could run a fuel altered.
I want you to stop there because I'm going to kind of go in phases through your guys' careers. I'm going to move over to Randy for a second. When you started running fuel altered, you had to be the youngest guy that got your license at that time, right?
Pretty close. I was 18.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I was mistaken and thought your brother did the driving and you came along much later. And then Randy corrected me and said, no, I got my license at 18. Did your parents not like you? Is that why they let you get a fuel altered license?
Yeah, my dad liked to beat me over the head, but no, it was great. We started out in sea gas, ran that for a couple years, and my dad had an auto parts store and an automotive machine shop, and one day he said, hey, you want to drive a fuel altered? I said, yeah.
Now, your father was still married at this time, right?
Yeah, but that didn't last.
Okay, was it because that she didn't want you getting in a fuel altered?
No, actually, my mother was really very supportive. She didn't like me either.
So when you went on tour in the Infinite Hero Pit area, times have changed, I get it. I have 3 crew chiefs. I actually have one more than everybody else. There's one babysits me and they just alternate, the other 2 tune the car. And then 7 full-time mechanics and me. You guys had a crew, I was trying to count up how many was on your team.
Me and my dad.
That's what I came up with, was 2.
My brother helped, but when we were traveling, it was just me and my dad.
So Dave talked a little bit about the different tracks that you could race at. You guys actually got to go overseas.
Correct.
England?
Got to go to England, got to go to Hockenheim, Germany, and then back to England. So we raced 3 times over in Europe.
I can't imagine what people overseas who had only seen these in the American car magazines must have thought the first time you guys made a run down Santa Pod.
We had a great time, and all those people over there were so supportive, and just I think they were amazed and had a good time with it, for sure.
Very cool. Hold that thought. We're going to come back. Rich, because Leon said he wants to go last, okay? When you built your first car, and Rich is one of those guys that was known as a owner-driver, and then I would say for the majority of your career, then an owner-tuner. But you started off as the driver.
I got in a very bad top fuel accident, and I was in the hospital, and I thought, I'll build me a nice little roadster that I can drive. So
you wanted something much more safe than a top fuel car. Yeah, that makes sense.
So if you want...
What medicine were you on in the hospital when you came up with this?
I was right in the lights, and a rear end came loose in a front motor car, so I was in there 2 years. This is the first time out.
Apparently you thought you were going to steal it, didn't
And
you?
this is the first time we ever ran the car. This is the Drag Sport Illustrated.
Yeah, that looks much safer than a top fuel car, sure.
It says, we think this car should have received the Unbelievable Performance Trophy after turning in a time of 174 and 869, an A hot roadster driven by Rich Guasco.
So, see guys, this predates, there was no fuel altereds back then. So, okay, in 1964, before they ever sprayed a glue compound on the racetrack, which would be a lot like running in the parking lot of Return Road at Pomona, you put a blown small block Chevy on nitro with the crankshaft 2 feet out of the ground in a car with a 92-inch wheelbase, went 177 miles an hour.
First time out.
Because you wanted to be safe.
Pardon? What did you say?
Because
you feel safe. Well, I was young. You didn't know any different. Well, I'll tell you what happened in my driving career. I set a record, and it was in the sports page of the newspaper. My folks weren't from this country. My mom she never looked at a sports page in her life. That day she looked at a sports page, and there was an article in there how I had gotten out of the hospital and I had set a record the first time out. That was the end of my driving career, let me tell you.
I see. So you and Randy aren't brothers. His mom gave him her blessing to go drive. I got you.
Well, in them days, NHRA only had a total of $3,000 insurance. So I was in the hospital 2 years, and my folks had hawked their house to pay the hospital bills. So when she found out I was back in the car, let me tell you, there was some mad Italians in that house.
You could have hired Maravas to drive.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It's a long story. You guys have to understand that one. So your mom banned you from driving.
Well, it was either that or I had to leave. So
smart boy. Okay, so your driving days were done when she told you that.
Yeah. No, I still drove after that. She just didn't know it. And then,
is there a confessional here when we get done with it?
And then Dale Emery was a really good friend of mine, and he had a top fuel car that didn't run very well. I said, Dale, why don't you just drive my car? So he parked his top fuel car, and he was with me for 5 years, and then he became the crew chief of the Blue Max, and he drove all kinds. He drove Jegs's car, and whatever car he drove, then I was a fly-in to work on the push. All I ever did was push pistons. I never tuned any of his cars. I used to tell him, how come when you drove for me you were so dumb and now you're so smart?
So when you built your car, I think it's probably safe to say when that car came out, it was arguably the best fuel altered out there. I hope Leon's hearing aids turned off right now because it's going to get ugly up here in a second. And you debuted it with the small block, which now I understand why. Your parents were out of money, and you wanted a safe car, right?
No, let me tell you something. The big thing we had with that car was the heads. We would warm it up and have to change heads. Man, we cracked some heads, let me tell you. So
now, so was the writing on the wall after a few years that to keep running at the top of the category, you had to go to the Hemi, or were you tired of the maintenance on the Chevy?
No, what happened was Willie ran 200 and Magnificent 7 ran 200, and we were kind of used to being the top car, and all of a sudden nobody would even talk to me. So on the way home from LA to Northern California, I told Dale, I think we need to put a big block Chevy in this thing. And then I looked at the heads and I said, no, we need to put a Chrysler in this thing. At the time, when big blocks first came out, the heads were terrible. So we put a Chrysler in it, and the first time we ran it, I think it was the Irwindale Grand Prix or something, I'm not sure. I know we ran 2:07 that night and set the NHRA record again, so. God,
Yeah, it seems like the Hemis still work pretty good, Rich.
Yeah, it was a lot.
We're not going to put a small block in our car for tomorrow.
Well, at least with the Hemi, you can make a couple of runs without putting another motor in.
Hold that thought, I'm going to get back to you. Leon Fitzgerald, I think it's funny when Ron was talking about Leon, he said Leon's going to be 85 next month. And I called you guys last week, I spoke with him. He goes, you know, I'm almost 85. I said, Leon, 15-year-old girls round their age up. 84-year-old men don't need to do that. 84 sounds good right now. So Leon was kind enough to bring a couple of trophies and a winner's circle picture. And as I mentioned to you guys, NHRA never really gave the fuel altereds a platform, probably because they talked to Rich's mom about this, and had their own eliminator. What they would do is lump them into competition or super eliminator, run them on a handicapped starting system relative to the national record. But at the bigger races, if there was enough fuel altereds that showed up, they'd all get together and run class elimination. This trophy is from 1971 Indy. They were already giving Wallies away at that point, but only if you won the entire eliminator. And let me tell you, for a fuel altered, I think one fuel altered made one final round. It was impossible to win an eliminator. You were running against 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 second cars that were super consistent and fast relative to their index. And you had to sit there for 4 seconds and wait for them. Interesting premise indeed, but I thought that was really cool that he brought out a Winter Nationals and a U.S. Nationals 1971 class eliminator trophies. So Leon, your first drag race ever as a driver.
Santa Ana Drags.
And what year would that have been? Get it within 10 years, Leon. Nobody's going to fact check this. 50 to 59. I know, that's the only years it was open, right?
It all got started with a pickup truck, and within a few months, I took the engine out of it and put a V8 Chevy in the Ford pickup truck, started going to Santa Ana Drags. And that's where it got started, was the Santa Ana Drags. And I have probably 3 nice trophies at home. You had to, if you won one weekend, you could save it up for another weekend, and then you got a bigger trophy. And I've got a big clock trophy from Santa Ana Drags and a lot of little trophies from Santa Ana Drags. Good old C.J. Hart, you know.
At what point did you decide, I'd like a safe car like Rich has, I want to build a fuel altered?
I had a little speed shop in Fullerton, and Jess Tyree was behind me building headers, and a guy came in there and said, hey, I got an altered. I'd like to just display it in your little shop you got here behind the theater. And I go, oh, okay. So as soon as he brought that little altered in, I thought, oh, I got to have one of these. So, you know, that's what started the fuel altered thing, was to build a fuel altered.
And your first fuel altered had the big block Chevy in it?
Nope.
What power
Had a
plant?
small block. And the kid that was with me at that time got drafted, and he had built a small block, and we put that in the car, and we barely got it running, and he got drafted and had to go with her to Vietnam, and he was gone quite a few years, and when he came back, I thought he'd be the driver, but he made a couple of passes and blew the fuel tank off the front of it. So, you know, it all just changes in those times as things go by, and you end up doing something different, and pretty soon you're building something else. And
so I'm trying to go from your buddy just got out of the military, blew up the fuel tank, till when did you find yourself strapped in the car saying, what the hell just happened?
yeah, Oh, I've had a lot of those things happen. You know, I've had a parachute come out and wrap around one of the wheels and try to turn the car into the side of the strip, you know, where the guardrail is. And I had another one where the clutch came apart and tried to cut my foot off. You know, thanks for St. Jude's there. They repaired all that stuff. And
then that was the end of your driving career?
No.
You let him get back in the car after that?
No. I was still limping out to the car, and the car was all back together, and we went down south to the little drive strip that's down there about halfway to San Diego and ran the car. And, you know, down there I met some guy, we was running pretty good, and he said, hey, we got tires. Would you like some tires, you know? Eventually we got some Goodyears, and then after that, you know, got some tires from back east. Shipped to you. But all this stuff just kind of accumulates, and you keep running those cars all over the place. And we used to match race a lot all over the country. Match racing was a big deal.
So at some point, and this can be for all of you guys, somebody had to realize there's money to be made. I want one fact, and then I want to go back to this. I was reading a lot of history to come up here and make this. And January 17th, 1965, Lions had a fuel-altered race, and more than 20, I think it was like 22 fuel-altered showed up for one event. Could you imagine that today? And this was when fuel-altered was an unlimited category. The fuel-altereds that run today are extremely exciting, but they run them off a 6-flat index to keep the cost down. I can't imagine a race where you have 22 fuel-altereds show up. And guess who won that one? This guy right here. I thought that was pretty cool. When you guys started traveling, I cut a clipping out. I left it in my truck, but I think it was 1966. And it had, I wanted to call the phone number and see if you picked up your cell. And Leon did the booking through 2 agencies for you guys as you traveled around the country. Tell us a little bit about the match race times.
About the what?
When you were match racing, the times that you guys were doing that.
Yeah. Well, the 2 guys that set up the races for us did it almost a year ahead of time. They were both from Chicago, and they would set up the races. So, you know, it was Willie Walsh and Don Green and 2 other cars. Myself.
Oh, the cars. Randy, you did that tour too, right?
Yeah, we did a couple times, a couple of years.
Yeah. So, you know, they set up races for the whole summer. So when the summer came, you know, we were ready to go. Well, the first race I can remember where we were almost crazy because we drove from, I was living in Fullerton at the time, I had to go all the way to Florida. No, you had a little trailer and,
But didn't your GPS tell you how to get there?
No, there was no GPS.
But you had your cell phone to call if you
No.
You guys get, this was a much bigger deal to travel 500 miles back then, much less clear across the country.
Oh, yes.
Randy, you had told me when you guys traveled, and you echoed the same thing, that in Chicago, to cut costs down, you guys based out of one shop?
Yeah, we were real fortunate to rent a shop that was large enough that we could actually pull all 4 cars in, and had an office. So we had cots, and we could sleep in the office, and my dad would sleep
you guys had a nice hotel with water beds down the street, right?
No.
Oh.
No. We don't have, I mean, we're racers. We were lucky to get a shower once a week.
Yeah, just like the good new days right now, huh?
Yeah.
Dave, you did some touring.
Yeah, I didn't join these guys. Willie tried like hell to talk me into traveling, and I said, well, I've got a house payment and kids in school. And he said, hey, do what I do. He said, when I leave in May, he says, my wife goes down and applies for abandonment. And she gets food stamps, and I get rent subsistence. And then when he comes back in August, I go down, my husband came back. And I was afraid to mention that to my wife, and I said she wasn't buying that at all. So I was kind of stuck on the West Coast, while these guys were traveling. we started gathering up cars to do Irwindale, Orange County, Long Beach, and all that stuff. So I've done more touring in the last 8 or 9 years than I ever did during.
I want to get back to that one too. Rich, how'd you pay the bills back then besides your race car?
Well, I had a small tow service, and my dad had a wrecking yard.
How do you juggle trying to make money at your Monday through Friday job and running a fuel car?
How did I juggle the deal, huh? It was very hard. The year before they went on tour, we actually, all of us went back to Texas and spent the summer. And on the way home, Dale rolled the truck and trailer over, and then I went to Funny Car. But I didn't have any money back then. Let me tell you something. It was really rough. CJ used to give us $100, but of course, gas back then was only 15 or 20 cents a gallon. So he would give us $100 to come to Long Beach, and we thought we were professional. I mean, I thought I was Don Garlitz when I got that $100 and got there.
I can't imagine trying to run. How many people besides you were on your car?
Just me and Dale.
With two guys that work regular jobs to pay their bills, and that money runs the race car, and at best you might break even on expenses, assuming you don't hurt anything, to have the longevity that all four of you had out there in your nitro careers.
And you don't eat a lot.
That might, and the cots probably cut down on some money too. So, Leon, the big block Chevy, you're one of the hitters of the day. Your car was as competitive as any out there. What was on the horizon at that point? You're a fuel-altered driver in the late 60s, and what does Leon Fitzgerald want to do with his career from there?
I don't know, it's always just been in my blood. There's always been a car in the garage,
Was there a time that you recognized, I can't do this forever?
No. I still got a car over in Vegas that we're going to go to Bakersfield in a week or so and do a little test and then come back in another week or two after that.
Now this is Pure Heaven 73 that we're on right now?
Well, from 73 it just kept on going, We always had a place to go race, and they give you enough money that it was worthwhile to go and come back, and the Chevrolet didn't blow up itself all the time. And then we go to a big block, of course, as soon as they came out, and I had a little shop, put a big block in there.
Do you still get a lot of enjoyment out of being at the drag strip and watching your car run?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
At what point did you get comfortable with not having to be in the seat?
As I got about 45, I thought, we've got to get somebody else. One of the guys that was actually working at the drag strip drove the car for me for a year or so, and and then I had another partner that actually wanted to drive a fuel altered, and a friend of mine built all the chassis that we had, and he had a nice car, and we just converted it to a fuel altered, and we drove that for about 4 years, and he's back on the East Coast now. But we were just with all the fuel altered shows, wherever they were at, we went. It's just been a great deal, It's just great to still have the car. It's a Chevrolet. They can't compete with the Chryslers now. All the guys are running so good. And it's getting real close to seeing what's going to happen after this year and go from there.
They could just stop prepping the track. It'll be just like the old days. I wouldn't go one wide at Vegas with one of those cars. So, Randy, to be 19, 20, 21 and driving a fuel altered, it's a dream come true, but I don't know at that age that you could really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think you're right. You can't really appreciate it. I really appreciate it now that I'm almost 70.
Well, when you called on the phone and you sounded 35, I'm like, it can't be the same guy that drove that car.
Well, it'll keep you young.
So when you going back to being in your early 20s driving one of these cars, at some point you're probably thinking about a career, maybe a family. What was going on with your racing and personal life at that point?
no career. All I thought about was racing.
Sounds just like me.
I actually joined the Army because I was probably going to get drafted anyway. I joined because there was a 24-month program. I found out that if I just went in, got it done, I could go back to racing again. I stayed in Vietnam an extra 2 months. I spent a total time away from the car of 19 months. I was back driving again.
And what year was this?
1969.
That's a great time to be in Vietnam, huh?
That's beautiful.
While he was gone, though, his dad let me drive it, and we won out here at Pomona with his car.
Does he know this, or is he just finding this out for the first time? You did what?
They used to send me drag news. I opened it up and I said, well, I can't tell you exactly what I said. But, you know, it's like, Dan, what's going on here? But, you know, it is what it is.
What was the last pass you made in a race car?
Bakersfield, 3 months ago.
What I love most about our sport, that if your eyes are in reasonably good shape, Chris Karamessinas is just a complete outlier at 87 years old to be able to do this, but there's no reason you can't drive one of these cars. Actually, when I looked at the cars walking in, there's no reason you should drive one of those cars, but I appreciate the fact that, how much longer can you keep doing this?
Until I can't walk.
I like that.
And then they're going to have to just, you know, put me in. But let me tell you something. Ron's older than I am, and he's driving the rat track.
You're never going to see Formula One or NASCAR with 70-year-old guys in there, although I would pay money to see a Formula One race with a bunch of 70-year-olds cruising at 45 around the racetrack. So Dave, take us down to the last couple years of your fuel-altered career. You guys built the Super Nanook, right, a giveaway car with Super Shops, and you guys were on top of the world.
Yeah, that was a time where I actually had more money that I could spend. You know, I mean, we lucked out and found a sponsor that had more money than brains and willing to give it to a fuel-altered guy. I mean, we got $125,000 to run that car in 1975. And that was a lot of money to a fuel-altered guy that was, you know, running for $700, $800 to win. And so when we gave that away, unfortunately, they wanted to move on to funny car, and we built a funny car and gave it away. But you know, that was probably the pinnacle of our career in fuel altered with me driving.
Well, and then you did hop in a funny car.
Yeah, I did the funny car 2 years, ran it. The problem was they wanted to expand and run the whole NHRA circuit, which meant going.
Yeah, that job would suck.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't figure anybody wanted to do that. So I backed out. Pat Foster drove it for about 6 months, and then they gave it to Ed McCullough, and actually he won Indy in '80 with it, same car.
So Dave and I, there's a lot of layers of connection. My competition number for years was 784, and I remember thumbing through old magazines, and that was your competition number.
Yep.
Your first pass down the drag strip was in El Camino. Mine was in an El Camino. You had a California chassis engineering car. My dragster over there is a California chassis engineering car, and we're both tall and handsome, so we have all that stuff in common.
Yes.
Is what I'm saying.
Yes,
So you were done driving. You had got away from drag racing and washed your hands completely of it. What the hell happened?
Well, I swore I would never spend a nickel of my money on a nitro car again.
And Super Shops was out of business by then.
Yes, and so my son takes me to the hot rod reunion.
Is Rick here right now?
Yeah,
Where's Rick?
Rick.
It's your fault, Rick.
Yeah, and I meet 40 old farts that I knew all my life, and they're all going, "Oh man, you need to build a fuel altered." And on the way home, Rick's going, hey, Dad, let's build a fuel altar.
Actually, Rick, brilliant move. Brilliant.
And the deal is, I'll spend the money. I'm looking at a 20-year-old kid, thinking, where in the hell is he going to get? But anyway, that's what we did. And
Okay, wait. So, right back into fuel altered racing.
Yeah. Never got any smarter.
And your son's in the car this time.
Yes.
How was that change? I was asking Leon, stepping outside the car after being the driver for so long.
I loved it. I got more enjoyment of watching him win and run that car than when I ran it.
Okay, and then he got that out of his system. Now you guys are completely out of drag racing, right?
No, that's not.
Did you bring Kyle with you?
No, well, he had to work. He was.
So Kyle actually, unlike you, Rick, Kyle actually is paying for the race car. So
Yes.
Rick's son Kyle, Dave's grandson Kyle, take it away.
Well, unfortunately, we had an incident in 2006 at the Gator Nationals where the car barrel rolled 6 times.
With Rick driving.
And unfortunately, took Rick's hand.
Yeah,
And,
nasty accident.
So I'm through. I'm going street rod building, and he said, "Dad, we have such a dysfunctional family. We don't hunt, we don't fish, we don't golf, we don't bowl. If you don't continue, you'll die." So he said, "Hey, I'd like to be crew chief, and we're 2 years away from Kyle being 18." So Rick's brother-in-law drove the car for a couple of years. And as soon as Kyle was making runs at 16 and 17, and at 18, he got his license and we put him in the car. So that's 3 generations.
And the legacy goes on. It's 3 generations driving the car with the same name. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is true.
Rich, how old are you? 58? 59? Hold the mic up. Now, almost 70 could be the other side, right?
Actually, I'll be 81 in next month.
I'm not putting any pressure on you, but it sounds like these guys aren't letting up.
Yeah.
If I had your money, I'd build 2 more fuel alters.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so you're running a tow service, running a wrecking yard, running a fuel altered.
Right.
Take us towards the time in your career where you realized, I don't have the money to keep doing this.
Well, actually, I never stopped. When I quit running my own cars, then I was an engine guy for Pastorini for 3 years, and I was a fly-in for the Blue Max. Every car that Dale Emery was a crew chief or drove, I usually ended up working on the car.
What's the last time you drove down a quarter mile? Was it before you put Emery in the car?
Yes, yeah. So it was around, I'm not sure, 65 maybe or something like that.
I'm just saying, Leon's got a car. We can get you in Vegas. Right down there.
You know.
What's the worst that could happen, Rich?
I've already been through the worst, so what the heck? I would love to get in a car if I thought I could do it, but I knew I would hit a guardrail or something, so I'd best stay out.
Isn't that a normal run in a fuel altered? I always say that you start out in the sport to make a mark on the sport. And you guys made a lot of marks. Some on the left wall, some on the right wall.
Yeah.
A couple of...
You did Goodwood.
Oh, I drove in Goodwin a couple years ago.
How'd that go?
As soon as they strapped me in, there wasn't a doubt in my mind that I could make a full pass.
So he was screaming like a child and you just stuck a rag in his mouth and fired the car up.
Yeah, I forgot all about it. We've been to Goodwood twice.
And how did that go? I want to know how the run went.
It was, there wasn't a doubt I couldn't drive the car. So then, but we just did burnouts basically. But when that motor fired up and I put that fire suit on, well, you know what it's like. You feel like you're Superman in there. And
no, I wish I was Superman so I could get the hell out because there's 2 guys holding me down and strapping me in.
No, there wasn't a doubt in my mind when we were at Goodwood that I could make a pass in the car.
So I had chatted with everybody on the phone like a week ago, and I'd asked you guys, because I don't want to put anybody on the spot. I hate when somebody does an interview and says, hey, 3rd round of the finals last year, tell us what that was like. I don't remember 10 minutes ago, much less 3rd. But I'd love to hear some anecdotes and some stories from back in the day. And whoever wants to go first can go first, but I think, you know, a 5-minute story about something that stood out in your mind, something that was fun, unique, terrible.
I used to get
He asked how Pure Hell got named. Okay, let's go back to this time in your life, Rich.
I had a good friend named Tony Del Rue, and he used to call me Pure. He was a professional fighter, and he used to call me Pure Hell all the time. And so when we built the car and it ran so fast right off the bat, he said, geez, that baby's Pure Hell also. So I thought, well, let's call her Pure Hell. So then one day I go to Long Beach, I think it was, and Leon was there, and they rolled their car off the trailer, and I saw Pure Heaven, and my first thought was, "Are you big asshole?" But then
Leon thought you just said, well, that's a nice paint job.
yeah. So, I mean, after a while, it was okay, but I was pretty upset. The most upset I was, he calls me up, he says, I bought a whole train load of Chevy blocks. And he says, come on down, I'll give you a good deal. So I go down there, and they were like $100 a piece. So I buy 5 of them, and we go to Hawaii. And this is the first time I ran one of his blocks. And so we had to do an afternoon run for some TV show. So we made like a half a pass and the block broke. And so they
you didn't buy the $1,000 blocks.
Right.
These were only the $100 ones.
Well, listen, this guy Pfluger, who took us over there, gave us a brand new station wagon to drive while we were there. And so, so I pulled the motor out of the station wagon. And I pulled the heads off in the cam, and I put my heads in cam in it, and these Hawaiian guys helped us lift the motor back in. And as Dale was going to the starting line, I could see smoke rings coming out of the headers. And he left the start. By the time I told him, whatever you do, try to take it as far as you can. He took it till there was only one rod left in the motor. And so I have no idea what happened to that car. The guys who were helping us, the Hawaiian guys, said, we'll get an old motor that runs and we'll paint it up and put it in the car. When they sell it, they'll never know.
I'm going out on a limb. You haven't been back to Hawaii since then?
Yeah, no, actually, we haven't actually. Stan Adams and this guy Pfluger took us over there. And that was an interesting time. Another interesting time was we had a Crosley steering in the car. And Woody Gilmore from Race Car Engineering was from our area. So every time we came to LA, we would stop there. And SPE went into business right in the same complex. And so he said, you need to take that Crosley steering out and put this SPE steering in. Well, it was a 2-piece shaft, and it had a coupler that you put the shaft in, and then you bolted it in. I forgot to put the bolt in. So Dale leaves the starting line. He gets about 10 feet off, and we see him going like this. He's trying to stick the steering back into this coupler, and he goes off the strip, and the car goes upside down, and he's drowning. And so we try to get him out, and we turned the car. We were trying to crawl under the car and undo the seat belts. That's how bright we were. Finally, we turned the car over, and we get him out of the car.
Hold on a minute.
Yeah.
I'm just wrapping my head around he's drowning, right? You said he wore glasses at the time, right?
He had his goggles on. He said he didn't know he was upside down in the water, but he had little holes drilled in the goggles to not fog up. And he saw the water filling up from the top down, so he knew he was upside down.
Usually a bad sign if you're in a race car.
So we get him out of the car, we get him over on the bank, and the ambulance guy comes over and he's trying to take his helmet off without unbuckling it. And I mean, he's pulling on Dale's head.
So he's choking Dale.
And so my friend Tony, who painted the car, was the professional fighter. He walked over, he thought if I say something to the ambulance driver, by the time I get it through that he has to do the helmet, I'll just hit him. So he hits the ambulance driver and knocks him out.
So then they brought in another ambulance driver for the ambulance driver?
Well, we took Dale's helmet off. So the ambulance driver shows up at the hospital, And we tell them, it's better you don't even find out who hit you. So then they released Dale, and before they let me go, they gave me a tranquilizer. I was in worse shape than he was.
I think I understand the story.
Yeah.
Leon's an a-hole. He owes you $500 in blocks.
Yeah.
You don't know how to bolt the steering together. And flip Dale upside down before he drowns.
Right.
I've got it. Leon, do you have a rebuttal to that?
We had an opportunity to buy like 100 blocks. I had a little place over in Anaheim. And we were selling the blocks, and my partner there was making some money. So, it was something towards drag racing. But that was all it was.
I want to hear a good story from your match racing times.
I think there's a lot of things went on in this drag racing thing when you got done drag racing, because one time we had to race it somewhere near the East Coast there, and then we had 2 more races, one the next day and one the next day. So for us to run 3 times in a row, we had to do some driving. And the one thing I remember, Willie Borsch and Don Green and the bunch, and me and my wife were following them in the car. I think I might have had a helper, I'm not sure. But they said, we're going to drive way on down here, and they drove about 15 miles and pulled over and said, we're going to sleep. Well, I think we just got done taking some pills that's supposed to keep you awake all night. My wife hasn't forgot that one yet.
Did you buy the pills from Guasco or trade?
Probably. Yeah, with somebody that was back east, because we traveled up and down, from Florida to up in the north there, and it wasn't that far from drag strip to drag strip. But we had 4 cars back there, and we could all make it, and we had 3 races that weekend, and when we got done, I think we got paid about $750 at each race, and our pocket was fat with money. We went at the one place, we went and rented a little motel thing, and it was pretty bad. We got done, we went back, gathered all our stuff, and went down to the nice hotel. We had money again.
When we were talking last week, Leon's talking about this match race booking. Why would you pack up all these cars from California, take them back east, kill yourself running 3 nights in a row, stay in a shop with cots set up in it, and then he told me the money was pretty good. And I said, oh, so when you got done with the tour, you must have came back and put all that money in your savings account.
And we're lucky we got home with any money. In fact, I got a check at home still for $750 from one of the strips that we ran out, and never got it made.
It wasn't Englishtown, I hope. I got bad news for you.
No, I'm trying to think who it was there. But anyway, we brought the check home thinking, hey, maybe we can stick this in the bank now. At least we can, pay some of the bills here. And the check bounced, and, well, put it back in there again. We put it back in again, and it never did. So, I think it was a year later, the same guy wanted us back there. So he said, well, what about the check deal? And he said, well, maybe I can make it good. And we did go back there, and he didn't make it good.
Did you give him some pills?
I think we spent all our money on pills just to get from here to there.
Sounds like he was a pretty smart promoter. Randy, what sticks out in your mind in those days?
All the fun we had, and racing with people that we really enjoyed. We were just one big 4-car family. And I want to mention that there's some really special ladies that put up with this crap. Darlene, my wife Sue, Linda. Come on, you guys. You are special. Please.
Ladies, stand up.
Come on.
I promise we won't make you answer any questions.
I have so many great memories. And just to pull one out of a bag is
Pull
tough.
out crappy memories. Sometimes it's the days things don't go right, like you let Rich bolt your steering in your car or something that make for a notable story.
Well, you know, one time we were in Florida, and we only had 3 cars. And so the drag strip decided, well, let's just take this little A-gas panel truck and race. You can race the Fiat, and we will, like you're talking about, give him about a 4 or 5 second head start. So off he goes, and I can't hardly see him. Finally, my light turns on, and I actually won. I caught him in the lights. Car ran 204. He ran like 145. And the guy came back to the car when we got back, and he was shaking. I mean, and he said, I will never do that again. He said, when you came by me, I thought I was going straight to the guardrail in about, 60 miles an hour. And anyway,
Were you?
fun.
Did you have your face pressed up against the window, giving the thumbs up as you went by?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Another quick one was, gosh, before they really started making real drag chutes, there was these huge parachutes that came.
The ring slots, yeah. Old cargo plane surplus.
Plane chutes.
Yeah, that's a good thing to stick on the back of the lightweight.
So we were running about 180 with the injected fuel big block Chevy, and the parachute, my parachute had broken, and this friend of ours says, "Hey, I got this parachute that you can use." And I said, "Well, is it cut down?" So what, they'd take this huge parachute, cut it down to a smaller size so it didn't turn you inside out when it came loose. So great. So I get down there, I pull that son of a gun. It lifts the back of the car up about 3 feet. And at this time, we had this full face mask. It went out. And when it came back, it was down here. And I'm kind of going, okay, you got a hand on the brake, one's on the steering wheel. Now what do you do? And the face mask has completely covered your eyes. Well, let go of the brake. Finally got it pushed up, got it all stopped. When I got back, the bar that it was all mounted to was like bent back 4 feet. But
So did he say, "Oh, you meant the medium parachute. Sorry, I misunderstood you." Good times.
good times.
Dave, how
We
about you?
survived.
Well, I got a couple. First, I'm the guy that had to give Manuel Herrera a 4-second head start at Pomona in his A-gas Anglia. And I had no way I could have caught him. But sitting there with a fuel car,
It
with a
doesn't
clutch.
seem like 4 seconds when you're the guy
it was
sitting there.
seemed like 5 minutes while he went down the track. And one that I really remember is at Lyons, we got hit by a train at the end of the track. We had actually went down, and Santa Fe tracks went across the end of the track. And I'm sitting there trying to take my fire suit off, and all of a sudden I feel the car moving. And I looked up, and the front stairway on the switch engine had hooked the front end of the car and was dragging the car down the track. And he stopped. And so I'm going, okay, you've screwed up my 12-spoke, but I think we can make it work. And C.J. Hart, Pappy Hart, was running the track at the time, and the conductor says, "That's fine, but we have to confiscate any vehicle that is in an accident on railroad property. And this is railroad property, so we're going to impound your car." Well, CJ came down there, and while they were yelling and screaming and all that, we hooked onto the car and hauled ass back to the pits. But other than that, they were all great. Oh, one last thing is a lot of cars and classes come and go, but one thing you gotta remember, fuel holders are like cockroaches. A nuclear holocaust could come, and there'll still be fuel holders hanging out.
What was the real reason why NHRA canned the class?
Have you seen those cars run? Anybody want to take that question? What was the reason that NHRA did away with fuel altereds?
1973, Wally Parks and Division 7 Director Bernie Partridge called me to Ontario Motor Speedway, and they were having the annual managers meeting, track managers meeting, and they called me in and said, oh, good news. You're not going to be allowed to run nitro anymore, and we're going to put you in pro comp, and you can run along with the alcohol funny cars and the alcohol dragsters, but you will not be allowed to run nitromethane. And I said, I'm not smart enough to run alcohol, and I sure don't want to have to spend the money on a bigger blower and transmission. I think we will stay and just run with the nitro on our own. And actually, I was told that we would never run at a NHRA track on nitro. They just didn't know Steve Evans and Donor. They were running 3 tracks up, and they're going, hey, we'll use you every weekend. And we just found out that it was probably the best decision ever made for us.
I'd like to say one more thing about Leon. After
not time
I
to get
broke
even.
all 5 blocks, last year he told me, those were seconds. I swear to God, that's it. I don't know if Leon remembers this, but we were in Texas, and the drag strip was in the middle of a cow pasture. So before we could run the cars, we had to walk the whole drag strip with shovels to get the cow poop off.
Well, hey, I'm just curious, for fact's sake here, what year was this when you bought the bum engines?
What did he say?
What year did you...
I don't know, 64,
The
65?
45-year statute of limitations, Rich.
Yeah.
You gotta let it go. Extra special round of applause. Leon Fitzgerald, Randy Bradford, Dave Hough, and Rich Guasco.